for our 10th Digital Strategy and Innovation for Medical Affairs Conference. We're going to go ahead and get started in a few minutes. We're just letting people trickle in. So just hang tight and we'll get started in about 3 or so minutes. Feel free to put in the chat where you're coming in from and we can go ahead and say hi. Hi, Elaine. I love Manhattan. Manhattan's great. I'm envious of y'all's weather up there because I'm in Texas. So it's currently 89 degrees right now in October. So that's super fun. Also, for everybody else who just joined, hi, Rob. We are currently just waiting on people to trickle in. So we'll go ahead and get started in about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started, Tanisha, if you're ready. Perfect.
Ready.
Awesome. So first of all, I just want to thank you to everyone who's joining us today. To start off, I do want to mention that we're going to have a 15% off discount code that's going to be valid for 48 hours following this webinar. To register for our 10th Digital Strategy and Innovation for Medical Affairs Conference. It's going to be on February 25th and 26th in Pennsylvania. The code is webinar337. I'm going to have Jackie post that in the chat for us just so we can have that available. We are very excited to welcome Tanisha Hill, an award-winning leader with more than 25 years of experience across the healthcare industry, spanning both the public sector and pharmaceuticals. Tanisha is currently the head of digital strategy and innovation at Teva Pharmaceuticals and the founder, president, and CEO of the Digital Health for Equitable Health Alliance, as well as the CEO for Curate Health. Amazing. Our topic today is going to be improving patient care with technology. We're going to go over 4 different dimensions of technology-driven care. These are going to include using AI and digital tools for clinical care management, breaking silos with digital platforms, meeting patients where they are, and lastly, turning real-world data into real-world change. Before we jump in, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Tanisha to introduce herself.
Thank you, Madison, for the wonderful introduction. You made me sound like I'm so super special. Yeah, so I am doing a lot because I'm very passionate about this space. Digital health to me is it's where we have the opportunity to really transform healthcare, quality healthcare in particular, and inclusive healthcare. So I'm excited that you brought me on today to have this platform and this discussion. I do work for Teva Pharmaceuticals. I actually am leading digital health or leading health and digital in general for Teva. And of course, all the opinions today are going to be my own and not of Teva Pharmaceuticals. But I also started a nonprofit and it's Digital Health for Equitable Health Alliance. And it was really born out of the whole idea that most people have some form of technology in their hands right now, across race, ethnicity, no matter where you're from. Somebody has some sort of technology. As a matter of fact, the last Pew statistics, I think it was almost 90% of folks have at least a smartphone of some sort. And so to me, it was just the opportunity to really start looking at how can we bridge the gap, reduce the digital divide, and maximize on what we have already. That includes solutions like apps and things like that people use for their healthcare. And the nonprofit really focuses on equity, as well as more primarily on policy around equity. And when we say equity, we really just mean being inclusive, right? So, for example, if there's a bill that's being considered and we notice that it doesn't include the aging, or it doesn't include people of color or people from underserved populations, or it doesn't include people who have hearing disabilities, we make sure we comment and just say, hey, red flag. And if there are policies that we feel like we can spearhead, we do that as well. And then I recently launched Curate Health, which you can see on my LinkedIn platform. It's really a consulting agency to help more of these tools become developed, right? Moving from just an idea to actually getting into patients' hands through development clearance with FDA, through all the way through getting market access. And so I'm excited because I think and I believe in my spirit that this is a way to get everyone an opportunity for good healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be starting out. Also, before we get started, I do want to mention to our audience, please feel free to put in questions in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll be reading them out during the session, so that way we can make this as interactive and as lively as possible. We always welcome questions. So, Q&A. So we are going to be starting out. We're going to cover how to use AI and digital tools for clinical care management. Tanisha, for the first question, how can technology help move healthcare from reactive to preventative care?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, I forgot to mention, I really want to thank the audience for joining today on your lunch break. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. So feel free to put questions in. So there are a couple things I wanted to at least take a step back, Madison, and chat about. When we say technology, even digital health or AI, they're really, really broad terms that are used sort of in an overarching way, depending on your walk of life in the healthcare system or in the whole entire ecosystem, right? And I know we're all excited about AI, but I think that there's two different ways to look at technology in healthcare. One is to improve efficiencies, right? So if you're in the clinical setting, maybe looking at scribes. If you're in the pharma setting, potentially looking at how can we use AI better for insights, right? Or how can we use AI to help support clinical trials to improve our drug development? But then there's another piece that really excites me. And that other half of it, of technology, AI, digital health, is really tools that patients can use. Tools that have the opportunity to help them either manage their care, improve adherence to medications. Some of them are actually, to answer your question, where I get really excited, they're actually predictive in nature. And I think we're now at the place where we can start looking at predictive care and proactive care. For a long time, we've only been either reactive because people get sick and go into the hospital or ER or doctor's office, or we've been trying to be preventive, right? So I'm an epidemiologist by training. I worked at the CDC for a long time, and prevention was always the biggest tenet that we were pushing. And prevention is half the cure, but now we can actually predict and we can use tools to really help with prevention. And so I think when you ask about how can technology help us get from being more reactive to more proactive, I think that there's a couple ways that we can do it, right? I think that there's diagnostic tools now, for example, that can help predict disease, like, for example, breast cancer. I actually chatted once with a company that was using algorithms to predict breast cancer in patients. Imagine catching it early, right?
Yeah.
People don't have to have a double mastectomy. So I think that we can really start employing these tools that are allowing us to be less responsive, more proactive, more predictive, to really get to a different place in healthcare. The other exciting part about healthcare is big data. right? So now we have a lot of information that we didn't have before. And even if there was a lot of information before, which it has significantly multiplied, by the way, we didn't know what to do with it. And now we have tools that can, look at data differently beyond what we can see with the human eye. So I really think we really need to try to figure out how to employ these tools and use them more regularly with less
Mm.
caution, right?
Yeah.
Not being as afraid of AI, taking a little dibble and dabble here and seeing how things apply in the healthcare setting that you're in.
Yeah. And you said kind of using or how to use these tools. What are kind of the obstacles or the roadblocks from allowing us to use these tools that you just mentioned?
Yeah, the biggest one is implementation. It's really
Mm.
just getting people having to do things that they weren't doing before, right? So, and how do you bring these new tools and technologies into the current healthcare setting, or how do you bring them into your current role, right? So, for example, clinicians are having a hard time right now, even though they may love the idea of technology. But how do you bring it into practice? How do you bring it into clinical workflow? Does it disrupt what you're doing right now? Does it mean that someone else is going to have to teach patients how to use an app, for example? Does this mean that they're going to have to hire more staff? And if you're in a bigger organization like a pharma company where I came from, or any other, healthcare setting, how do we take on these big, these new opportunities, these new software? Who actually is going to manage it? How many people are going to actually use it? Who's going to do the training? And can you be really connected to the outcome, right? I think one of the challenges we have is that we have these great ideas about what these technologies can do, but I always share that if you don't have the right KPIs, they don't seem to work. So imagine now you're seeing other people report out that they didn't have a great opportunity with whatever tool they had. And you're thinking about using the same tool or a similar tool like Viva, like Insights Collection, for example. You may be more apprehensive, which is a barrier. It's behavior change at the end of the day. And to me, that's the biggest barrier. People might talk about cost and, other barriers, but implementation to me is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know some patients may feel intimidated or confused by these new digital tools. How can you make these technologies more accessible and user friendly for the patients?
Yeah, I think we can start by including patients in the design.
Mm.
And there's a lot of that doesn't happen. And I had shared another discussion that a lot of these tools are created by people who either are patients, because at the end of the day, right, Madison, we're all patients, right? Because
Yeah.
folks on the line, we're all a patient in some capacity. And I think sometimes we get these really cool and exciting, useful tools that are developed by patients, but not every patient is the same. We all have very
Mm.
different DNA. We're all different. We all culturally are different. We're exposed to different things in our environment. And so, even if the tool hasn't had the opportunity to be exposed early on to more patients, more patient types that
Mhm.
might find usefulness, it's not a miss. It's still an opportunity to really maybe have a few patients try it, do a focus group, get some
Yeah.
insights, because I was in a space where we develop technology. There's always a 2.0 or a 3.0 version, or there's always
Mhm.
opportunity for growth and improvement. And I think patients are intimidated because they're not part of the process as well, and we hear that a lot with the nonprofit.
Mhm. And do you know, I know that sometimes they're not part of the process, but what are some of the best ways to kind of like include them in that process?
Yeah, so reaching out to institutions where you can get to patients if you don't have access to them directly. I found in my experience, both working to develop digital tools on the pharma side of things that are FDA approved, not just FDA cleared, that academic institutions are often willing to help. There's big pushes now in academic institutions to be digital. They're very patient forward, especially those with thriving medical centers. They're putting a lot of budget towards digital. Some of them are in underserved populations, and so there's opportunity to get a good mix or blend. Even with the nonprofit, so it doesn't. People didn't just work with me because I was working at a pharmaceutical
Yeah.
company. I think they're working, even when I went on the nonprofit side of things, because we all want better at the end of the day. And so my recommendation to make sure patients are more involved, and to help them adopt as well, because implementation for them is a challenge too, right? Do I have to download one more app? Is this going to cost me more money? Will I have time to really look at this thing if it has more data? Those are questions that come up that are that help with the intimidation, and to help get over some of that, it's good to just kind of work with them. And advocacy groups are always a good place to go to. We worked quite well with advocacy groups, so those are my recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rob brought up a great point, Robert Caper. He said that implementing them and the design is good, and listening to them is very important as well to the process. And I think that's a amazing point, Robert. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Rob.
Perfect.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're going to go into kind of our next section. We're going to be looking at connected and coordinated care. So breaking silos with the digital platforms. Tanisha, what digital tools are most effective in connecting teams and patients across the care continuum?
Yeah, so when it comes to patients and clinicians, that dyad communicating, I think we rely right now on two things. That's that's EHRs, right? Or electronic health record, and also telehealth platforms. And there is a challenge there. It's what we have and it's what we know. But the challenge is that it doesn't always work for everyone, right? And so, or it's not accessible, I should say, to everyone. Meaning, I'll give you a good example. My parents are now, praise God, 91 and going on 90. And I schedule doctor's visits, and they're going strong. They just need a regular checkup. But guess what? I have to e-check in. They have to e-check in. They now have to get on a portal, and they have to go in online, and they have to answer all these questions after hitting the e-check-in button. These folks don't know anything about online e-check-in. They don't have the caregivers around them. They get left out. And oftentimes, I think EHR is a great place to be able to share lab test results, to be able for clinicians to hear from patients, answer their questions, set appointments. All of that is now available, but not always accessible. And so for right now, that's what we have. And I think we do have to make an effort across the ecosystem to help it become more accessible for patients, right? Make sure that there's languages that patients can actually respond to. And I just left the health conference. There are some really great apps and tools out there that can convert. There's one woman that just won one of our startup competitions that can convert, plain language that you see elsewhere into another language to help. It was actually very fascinating.
That's so cool.
Shop with that tool. I can't remember how many hundreds of languages she can translate into, but those are things you have to think about, and disabilities. So EHR for sure, and the same thing with the telemedicine connection. I'm excited about telemedicine. That's one of the things we do. Telehealth is one of the things we do advocate for with the nonprofit to make sure that clinicians can get reimbursed for that time. But suppose you don't have internet access. Suppose you don't have broadband, right? And so I just think that those are a couple tools. But the most exciting that I think has even more promise is remote patient monitoring. So the patient doesn't necessarily have to log in anywhere unless they're using a tool, like an app, for example, that's tracking, like in our experience, tracking inhaler use. But once they do that one step, it's not like e-check-in every time, right? That one step sometimes allows passive collection of really clinically important data that can really help a clinician manage a patient. So to me, those are the top three right now. And then there's also portals and other companion apps and things like that people can use. But to me, when it comes to the entire ecosystem and where we're thinking about valuable care and quality care, I think that those are the top three.
I love that. And I know that you mentioned remote patient monitoring, which I've heard a lot about too. What are some of the biggest, I guess, struggles that you kind of see with remote patient monitoring, and kind of ways that you can combat those and actually implement it more?
Yeah. So the biggest one, I think, again, it goes back to implementation. I call it the I word for many years, because because you can get the information, but who's going to look at it, right, on
Mhm,
the back end? And there still needs the HI, right? We still need a human interaction, right? We still need the human
yeah,
intelligence, another I word, right? And so people sort of need to be reimbursed for that, right?
mhm,
Or because you got to pay the person to kind of keep the lights on. You got to pay the person to look at it, whether or not it's a nurse or a mid-level provider or
yeah,
a medical assistant. So it's really exciting to have the information, but you have to be able to implement it into an actual workflow setting. And there are several RPM companies that are really, really good about collecting the data, streamlining it, making it more accessible even for the clinician, so they're not having to weed through a lot of information.
mhm,
So you can collect information on like A1C plus, whether or not they had any sort of asthma exacerbation. Because, most of these tools that we're developing, there are a lot of them that focus on chronic disease and a lot in the mental health space, which is where we need to be, right? Because
yeah,
80% of chronic disease are actually related to behavior, which is why I'm excited about these apps because they change behavior, even
mhm,
if they have a game. One of the things we learned, Madison, when we were advocating on the Hill, is that some of our legislators were concerned about covering gamified apps for Medicare patients because of the game part. And there's a
yeah,
lot of data that shows games actually change your behavior. And so I think that, when it comes to RPM, the biggest challenge, again, just goes back to who's going to look at the data, who's going to manage it. But you can catch a lot with data
mhm,
that's collected remotely. I'll give you an example. We actually published on this. I mentioned an inhaler device that collects patients' information. It collects how they use their inhaler, their medication, as well as some inhalation parameters, like real biometric type information, right? Like their inhaler, how they were inhaling, how fast they were inhaling, etc. And we were able to look at that data and be able to predict whether or not they would have an exacerbation, an asthma exacerbation, within 5 days of actually having it. Imagine being able to stop people from going to the ER or,
yeah,
having being hospitalized or, unfortunately lose them, from the space that we're in. If we can
mhm,
now look at data remotely and, apply algorithms to it and intervene sooner, that's really where we're getting away from the predictive, sort of the preventive. It's a bigger way to look at preventive care, right? And now really being more proactive.
I love that. We did have a question come in from Robert.
Yeah.
He said, "How do your parents in their 90s get into different apps for each healthcare provider or system?"
They really don't, Robert. That's the trouble. I find that my mom is really good about figuring out how to use the app to do one of those games that she likes, like Scrabble, for example. But she can't maneuver from one app to another, and I think that that's where I'm sort of pushing for. How do we be more inclusive
Mhm,
to folks that are even the elderly or people who speak different languages? There has been some data on just even using simple icons. Right now, I think what technology is doing in healthcare, from a healthcare management perspective, is putting a lot more on the caregiver. And caregivers, there's a whole sandwich generation, people who, have parents that are elderly, but kids that are still either in high school or not yet on their way to college. And you have to manage all of that at the same time. It is putting a little bit more pressure, I think, on the caregivers of this in our society. Eventually, I think it'll evolve where, just like TV and the computers and all that, it'll evolve where everyone gets access. But we have to take the time to try to introduce things slowly. And one of the things that goes back to what you were saying, Robert, that goes back to making sure that the technology itself is easy to use and valuable. There's a technology acceptance model that I really base all my research on. It stresses that any tool to be truly adopted properly requires it to be easy to use and also have some sort of value to folks.
yeah. And then he follow up on that
Yeah,
one.
less apps. Yeah. So I strongly believe in less apps too. We have apps that are, sort of where people are going because it's what we know. But one of the things we have been advocating for, to your point, Robert, is that not everyone can get to an app, right? So even, for example, when we're advocating for telemedicine on the Hill, there's an audio piece, and that was actually removed. I don't think people are aware that that was actually removed, Allison, medicine from the language. And I think that there's more opportunity for more text. There's more for those who are tech savvy. They can do text sometimes. One of the great tools that I saw at Health as well it covers all the HIPAA compliant challenges and turns information from the EHR into text for folks who can manage text, but also just being able to make a simple phone call. The user doesn't actually always have to have the digital piece either, right? If they're in their 80s or their 90s. But the digital can still be useful for the caregiver, like I mentioned, or more importantly, for the clinician who has to kind of weed through all this information, especially if they're at that age. They're going to have quite more, a lot more comorbidities, a lot of challenges. But imagine now being able to just simply message them or call them. You've taken all this, distilled all this data down and all this information, and now you have a recommendation. The technology could actually just reach out to the user. I saw it Health last year. I didn't see it this year. NVIDIA had a fantastic avatar, and this avatar does all that work for you, for the clinician, and then it actually calls the patient, and you think you're talking to someone, which would be great for my parents because now they don't have to download an app. And it even said, hey, we see that this is what was happening. The doctor wanted me to reach out to you. Can we schedule your follow-up appointment? I just thought that the avatar was amazing. So these are just examples of how we can address folks who don't have access to the apps and things like that.
Yeah. We had another question come in from Tom George.
Hi,
He said,
Tom.
EHR patient interface has minimal design from the health systems, but more controlled from the large EHR companies. Are these large EHR platforms evolving their patient-centered design or meeting patients at variable digital fluency to enhance the implementation?
That is an extremely important point, and you are spot on. I actually worked with EHRs many moons ago in the clinical setting. I was working in pediatric pulmonology many, many years ago, and we had EHR earlier than most. So I say many years. I think it's been about 15 or 20. I started in, I can't remember, 2004, I believe it was. So this is how way long ago. And we had Epic. And I remember just trying to do a simple study, Tom, and the folks on the line, to just look and see who was inside the patient population that we were seeing so that I could do clinical research. I was actually working with a sponsor at the time, and I could not even get into that information. There was no adjustments. It was hard to get anyone on the phone to kind of help me, talk to the Epic folks of the world and these large EHR folks of the world about adjusting to not just be more patient-centered and patient-focused so patients could do something, but even the clinicians, I couldn't get anywhere. But today, even if those larger organizations and these, mega monster-sized electronic health record platforms aren't able to pivot, I think that there's interest. I have met with several of the leaders in these spaces. They're interested in doing this. It may take a little bit of work. Like I mentioned, the RPMs of the world can help you develop interfaces and other technology developers too can help develop interfaces, use API, right, where they're sort of exchanging information from the EHR to create a more useful interface that we can work with, I think. That can be more patient-centric.
I love it. And then can you share where you saw the NVIDIA avatar?
I saw it at Health last year. I missed whether or not they mentioned it this year, but I did get a chance to pull it up online. So I did see the actual avatar when I went to their website.
Very cool. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and go into our next session. Feel free to keep posting questions, guys.
Please, yeah, this is
Yes,
exciting.
I love questions. We're gonna move into personalized and participatory care. How do we make patient engagement technology genuinely personalized and inclusive?
Yeah. So when we say personalized and participatory care, that goes back to just really medicine, right? Meeting patients where they are. And
Mhm.
I think we shared quite a bit of that discussion earlier, making sure that patients are involved in some way, shape, or form, making it more personalized and inclusive, meaning not just, people have cognitive disabilities. There are people with hearing impairment. There are people who just, can't, they have visual impairment. And so I think as we move forward, even if we haven't developed the tool, I think that there's ways to either educate or, work within the clinical setting or within your own setting. Even if, like for us, when I'm working on the pharma side of things, if I'm going to be developing a study, for example, and I'm going to use a certain app to collect information in my clinical trial, I'm going to make sure that I have developed a brochure or some sort of, we can go back to the standards still apply. We still use paper and pen. I'm going to make sure that the learning tools are available so that they understand no matter what place they're coming from, right? So if I have to change the language, then I'll do that. If I have to make sure that, that there's, anything in place for the visually impaired, I do that. For example, I'm always telling my team, make sure whatever we develop is not a bunch of green and red. Not everyone, there are people who are colorblind. Not everyone can see red. Not everyone can see green. So I think it's really just thinking about patients overall. When I developed, give you an example, when I developed Curate Health and was working on the website, and I'm going, from platform to platform, having these same kinds of conversations, either in webinar format, live stages, or a podcast. And I myself I had to take a step back to be more exclusive with my own website. And we were using Canva, and I was like, I was so excited about all these, I could bring in these moving videos when we first started. Oh, this is going to be so great. And the same thing for the Teva website. I'm like, let's update the website and put a video on it. Tanisha, not everyone's going to see the video. And I had to think about that, right? And so luckily, Canva actually taught me a thing or two, because it taught me about putting alternate texts, for example, for folks who can't see the moving videos. And so those are things that we can do, I think, to really become more personalized and inclusive. I think it's really, to be honest, the first step is to just be top of mind, because top of mind is what made me go back and make adjustments to a simple website, not realizing that I wasn't thinking about everyone who might, log on and see it. And so top of mind is the first start. And then from there, just thinking about what other, challenges people may have if you cannot actually get to patients directly. I think that's a good way to start.
I love that. And kind of going, I guess, bouncing off of that is how can you balance the convenience of digital tools with the need for those personal and empathetic connections?
Yeah, it's a tough balance because, like I mentioned, we're all sort of different, right? And you're not going to capture everyone at the end of the day. And I think that the balance is still around, it basically is just trying your best as an individual. I think the other thing is that we don't realize in this big space that we are true individual contributors. And, I have to take a step back and sometimes think, am I really making a difference? And then I realize that I am. Even if I can't get whatever the tool is to absolutely everyone, I can work with folks who, and I do a lot of this, networking is key. Work with folks across the whole healthcare ecosystem. I'm sure we have, the folks on the line have some connection within the entire ecosystem, whether or not it's working directly with an HCP, being an actual patient, being a friend of a caregiver, a patient with Alzheimer's or a patient with bipolar disorder, for example. Just asking lots of questions. I think that's the best way to start, to try to figure out how to balance it all. And I try, when I share this information, I try to think about what can you actually walk away from listening to me that you can actually do.
Yeah.
right? In the big scheme of things, I could say, well, we could run a clinical trial and we can create all these focus groups to really try to develop balance and get an understanding and get to as many patients as possible. And a lot of times we don't have the funding, we don't have the resources to do that. But we do have networks. And I believe in just, asking questions and partnering. And I think that that's a good way to start. Because if you can't get directly to the patient, you can probably get to someone who has been in contact with that patient.
Absolutely. We had a question come in from Elaine. Are there therapeutic areas that have a higher likelihood of success in what you are discussing here? Like, would TAs like obesity have greater success because of its baseline existing visibility and patient interest compared to one like hypertension, which has no symptoms? Is it more effective to focus on specific therapeutic areas rather than general?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So first, I'll say that I don't know right now that there's any one therapeutic area, one disease state, or one disorder that would benefit greater. I do know in the digital health setting, there are more apps, there are a lot of apps, I should say, to support mental health, especially around cognitive behavioral therapy. And they have been shown to have significant improvement in impact in patient populations. You can see that there's some of them that are actual digital therapeutics, what the FDA is considering DTXs that have the rigor that they would give that sort of clearance approval as a DTX or digital therapeutic. And they have the rigor because they're doing the studies to demonstrate the impact. To answer to your point, Elaine, we did see some significant impact with our tool in patients with asthma. And this is across the United States. So we see impact there. I have done quite a bit of research on looking at how these tools impact patients in marginalized populations. And I've seen the impact of these tools in hypertension. I've seen impact with these tools with patients who have diabetes, especially. I've seen impact with these tools. And some of them really, to your point, Elaine, aren't necessarily just looking at improved outcomes. Like, for example, are we reducing A1C? They're also showing impact in adherence. I've actually written, I should publish this, but I had to write a paper for my dissertation many moons ago. And I actually looked across about 10 or 15 years to see what kind of impact these technologies are having. And impact was not just related to healthcare outcomes. It was related also to whether or not there was patient satisfaction. So are they actually using these things and using them consistently? It was related to adherence. So if there's any technology, most of these therapeutic areas, if you have a therapeutic, that your patients are supposed to be using and we're not using them, you can actually see if they're using them more appropriately and thereby getting better. So adherence is another way to look at across therapeutic areas, and the outcomes will vary, like I mentioned. So even if there are no symptoms, so to speak, I think that there still has been measurable impacts. I mean, I'm happy to chat offline and really dig into like specific therapeutic areas that I saw. I saw impact too, believe it or not, across the age continuum. So there were some people, especially when we launched the digital inhalers, there was a thought that clinicians and patients who are over a certain age, and I won't say what that age was because I'm very close to it, I'm not happy. I'm not elderly, but there was this belief that over a certain age, you won't use the technology. And that wasn't true. We found, and I've seen research on it too, and we found that that actually wasn't true. So it's going to vary, I think, Elaine, and the folks on the line from, therapeutic to therapeutic area. And really, use of these types of technologies really haven't so far been pigeonholed to any showing impact in any one therapeutic area. I know that they're also used a lot in the oncology space, especially when it comes to prediction. But there is an impact. There's opportunity. My point is, there's opportunity to have impact without symptoms. There's opportunity to have impact on outcomes as well as response to medication and whether or not patients are taking these medications. I hope that answers your question.
And then from Tom, are you aware of how digital tools or AI has helped in identifying rare diseases, either on the patient or clinician or health system side?
Yes, absolutely. I've seen quite a bit on the algorithm side, especially when it comes to using natural language processing, or looking at predictive algorithms to identify disease. And the challenge in the rare disease in that space, though, to your point, that because not everyone has it, you don't always have enough data. And I've seen folks using synthetic data quite successfully, Tom. So they're applying these digital tools against data that's also synthetic in nature, meaning you're not actually getting real patients information. So you get real patient information, right? It'll fully describe a real patient, but it may not be Tom, for example. So I've seen some digital tools in the rare disease space being truly helpful. I've seen them in the rare disease space being helpful for patients to actually manage their care, as well as predict whether, prognosis of disease, for example. So happy to share some of those in more details offline. You guys can reach out to me. You all can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I can share some of the literature that I've seen so far.
Awesome. We're going to go ahead and go into our last section.
Okay.
But before we go, not before, but how can we turn real world data into real world change? So the first question is, how are organizations transforming data into decisions that improve care quality?
Yep. So this is the exciting part, right? So we get an opportunity here to kind of transition from just how is technology used in patient care settings to now where I was mentioning earlier the other side of looking at AI technology and digital health, which is where you can use these tools in organizational settings for efficiencies, to help with drug design and drug development if you're in that space. And so I'll give you a couple of examples of what we're doing, or what I've been doing on the pharma side of things. And that's really like using AI, for example, to better identify patients, using social listening to get real patient insights. We're doing some of that. I'm leading that. I think it may be messy. People call it data. I try not to call it data. It's messy information because it's just what people are thinking. But I was sitting in another conference recently, and I heard a pharmaceutical company, give a really good example. Or it's actually a group that was working with a pharmaceutical company. And this company was really focusing on endocrinology in terms of therapeutic, and they had a therapeutic area coming out. And they were excited about reaching out to endocrinologists and using this type of information, social media information, using AI, and just seeing where patients were actually going. A lot of the patients were actually going to their mental health providers. And so their strategy would have left out that provider subset. They would have just gone directly to endocrinologists, not knowing that, using these tools now and these technologies, that patients are actually going to see mental health and talking about this particular disease in the mental health setting. So that allowed them now to kind of pivot, right? And target these mental health providers and provide information to patients in that setting. So you're getting to a larger number of patients, probably more accurately. And so that's just one way. And then, of course, using AI to kind of comb through trends and insights. You don't have to be in a pharma setting to really hear what people are saying about the work that you do or the space that you're in, and translating those into insights that can be used to develop business strategy. I think that there's ways to use tools in that way to really change, but also to, of course, provide efficiencies, right? Make things run faster and smoother in ways that, and reduce error. I think that's one of the key areas that we can rely on these tools now, is to kind of reduce error. I don't know if there's any specific questions about, I won't name drop any tools, but if there's any specific questions about, in this setting or in the settings that you all are in, those listening, I'd be happy to answer those as well.
Yeah. We did have a question come in that says, will digital or AI health be taught in medical or pharmaceutical schools?
Very interesting. So great question. Digital is being taught currently in medical schools for sure. I've actually partnered with a few medical programs who have a significant interest in this space. I've actually published even with major institutions, academic institutions, looking at algorithms and that type of work. Pharmaceutical companies are becoming more and more involved in using AI, and so wrapping that into everything that we do, from throughout the entire business as well as throughout the entire life cycle of the drug. And that includes teaching folks who come in as interns. We're constantly thinking about how can we apply AI. And I was just sharing with a colleague here, he's doing digital health on the global side of things at the most recent health conference last week. And there was an entire pharma section. And I listened to some of my pharma colleagues, and most of their presentations were talking about exactly what you're saying. How can we advance AI? How can we transform it into the work that we do? They were giving, clear-cut examples of how they were using AI in the clinical development setting, for example. So I think that there's going to be more utilization, more training, more teaching that's going to be out there for sure. I've actually seen it growing in this space. I've never gone to health and seen that many clinicians, that many physicians, or that many pharma. So, and they were so proud to kind of share, what they were doing from an AI perspective. So I think it's going to continue I think it's infectious, even though it's scary, right? I think because we're not sure yet. We don't have a lot of guidance yet around AI. There's not a lot of, there's still a lot of ethical challenges around the utilization of AI that we kind of need to master and look at standardization. But I think because it is a very hot topic that people are learning more and more about it, even on their own. I was teaching my dad just last week how to use ChatGPT. It wasn't successful, but at least now he knows. And he said, I just learned something, and now I know what you mean by AI. So I see it happening. I see more learnings in the clinical setting. I see more learnings in the academic setting, and I see more learning and training in the pharma setting. And I just hope that it continues to grow.
Yeah. And I know that you just mentioned something about the ethical considerations, and that kind of leads us into our next question. But what are some of those ethical or compliance considerations when using AI-driven insights in these clinical decisions?
Yeah, privacy is a big one, right? I
Mhm.
think that goes without saying. A lot of people are not really sure how their information is being used.
Mhm.
There's a lot of, but believe it or not, there's a lot of data safeguarding that takes place, right? We've got the fire guide, we've got all kinds of guidances right now, not exactly where we could be, but people are using blockchain, for example, to really make sure that they're providing safeguards around people's data. So I think privacy is a big one. When it comes to, there are some other ethical considerations. I am still a big advocate of those groups that are not able to speak for themselves. So when it comes to children, for example, we have the COPA laws that are in place that people have to make sure that they abide by. So that's good. And then there's the potential to increase the digital divide, I think, with these tools, because you could actually use AI to, marginalize groups, right? Which we don't want to do. I've seen, unfortunately, some literature and blogs and people talking about ways that AI have been used to make sure that certain people get an appointment to see the doctor before others. That's actually taking place today.
Mhm.
And so there's things that we still need to do around making sure that there's privacy, that data is safeguarded, and all these other ethical concerns that we're not using AI for bad. But AI is still reliant on the human interaction. It's still relying on human intelligence. And to your point, I think it was Tom that asked a question about. I'm not sure who asked a question about training. The more we learn and the more we get ahead of AI, I
Mhm.
think the better off we'll be. And so I
Mhm.
encourage, even in my last discussion, I think Madison, you heard on stage, I encourage folks to, don't let the train get ahead of you, right? You can even use AI chat GPT to just ask basic questions about AI. And so to me, and about ethics around AI. So to me, that's sort of some of the examples.
Yeah, I love that. And I know that using AI is important, and we've talked about this entire conversation.
Mhm.
But what strategies have you seen work best when it comes to kind of aligning cross-functional teams around these digital initiatives
Mhm.
and getting everyone to work together?
Yeah. So I've been excited about certain things like for business efficiencies, like Copilot, right?
Mhm.
A lot of people are now, and I keep hearing, even at Health, when I was at this last meeting and the one before that too, there's a lot of folks who ironically have, the 365 software, Microsoft 365 platform, and they also have Copilot, but people aren't using it. And we are just as guilty in our organization of not making the most of it. And I
Mhm.
think that when it comes to, collaborating and working cross-functionally, some of those business tools that are already in place can actually be helpful. So I just started learning the other day on my own how to use the whiteboard, for example, for my team. All of my team meetings, we use Teams and we take notes within that platform. And those notes get transferred everywhere. So we're all on the same page. And I can actually take notes and ping people, and it can automatically send you alarms. And so it's a way to really help with communication and transparency, which is key when you're talking about cross-functional collaboration, especially across large organizations, particularly if they are global in nature. Not everyone can be on at the same time. And so that's just like one example of some of the tools that are already available to us. And we're looking at collecting data as well from all different parts of the organization, right? Are you getting calls in to ask questions? We're doing that too. We're looking at medical information. How are we looking at that data? Can we create a data lake, or can we create a home for all of the data and then start applying these tools to just comb through it, look for trends that could actually inform our strategy? We might be missing things. We might be missing how we could be better communicating. We might be missing adverse events from drugs. We might be missing things that we can now collect uh, and share, because each person has a role, right? Whether or not you're in safety, if you're in the pharma side of things, or if you're in where I am in medical affairs, or if you're on the commercial side where you got to come up with marketing and strategies, or if you're in the clinical setting and you've got nurses in one area, but you got the front office in another. You might have folks who can help patients with their, social determinants of health. So you might have like mental health experts. I think that, just maximizing sheer communication alone is a great way to start. But applying AI and collecting data and looking at trends is another sort of recommendation that we can do today.
Yeah. So I know we're coming up on time, but I wanted to ask you one last question. And
Mhm.
it's kind of a big, broad one, but where do you see this topic kind of translating into the future? Like if you look to the future, like what would your hope be for incorporating
Yeah.
technology into patient care?
Yeah. So I mentioned in the very beginning, there's two tracks, the way I see it, right? There's two tracks. So the first one, what we talked a lot about, was patient utilization of these tools to help with managing their care. If it was up to me, if I could share with the entire world, I would love for enough resources, enough funding, enough, research on ethics, things that are already in place, that would be in place to make this sort of digital health in general be standard of care, where people aren't worrying about workflows and implementation. It's already implemented. We know how to do it. People are pulling out their digital tools like they're pulling out their apps on their phone to navigate, like the map to get from point A to point B on an Apple phone, right? So to me, what would be ideal, yes, it's very future forward. But if I had my way, that's really what would happen on the digital health side of things, right? I do think we're farther along there than the other half of things, which is where I talk about efficiencies and using these tools to maximize how we communicate, how we run business, how we do clinical, drug development and drug design. Drug design is big. Not every drug works for everybody.
Mm.
And so imagine now if you have tools that can actually look at patient populations. Again, I mentioned I'm an epidemiologist, right, by training.
Mm-hmm.
So now we look at patient populations and look at these folks as real patients and real people, and let some of the AI do what I was sharing earlier, meaning getting like patient insights, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we can really see, medicine really quickly. I saw a paper, and I was actually working with a person who wrote a paper on this as well. When it comes to clinical trial design, only 2% of the population actually reflects the real world
Wow.
in a clinical study. So yes, I would like AI and technology and to be able to now get to leaner and get closer to real world patients, making these drugs more available to patients, making it easier for clinicians. It's a burden, it's a challenge right now. You're seeing 23 patients a day, making it easier for, cost containment for like IDNs and other institutions who are larger, and costs really changing costs really impact them, changing costs impact patients. So for me, it's twofold: tools that actually help patient care management, but also the actual implementation of tools to help us be better, have less human error at what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Tanisha, for joining us and sharing your thoughts. And if anybody has any other questions, please post them in the chat. Other than that, I wanted to say thank you to our audience, and thank you to them. Wonderful talk. It was amazing. And also, just as a reminder, we do have that discount code coming up. It's going to be a 15% off for our 10th Digital Strategy and Innovation for Medical Affairs Conference in February. Tanisha will be speaking there over the importance of digital opinion leaders to drive awareness and engagement. We would love to see everyone here there as well in person. And other than that, I just want to thank everyone again.
So do I. Thank you so much for the engaging discussion. It's kind of tough to do these without seeing you live. So I appreciate the questions in the chat, and I appreciate you all for listening to me today.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Madison.
Bye.